What's up guys, Tommy Bowyer here from Movie Rewind, and today I will be reviewing Doctor Who Series 7. There will be spoilers for this review, so without further ado, let's get into it. Doctor Who Series 7 stars Matt Smith as the 11th incarnation of the Doctor and Jenna Coleman as his companion Clara Oswald. It aired from the 1st of September 2012 and concluded after 13 episodes on the 18th of May 2013. Like its predecessor, Series 7 airs in two specific blocks. Part A, which consists of 5 episodes, aired in the autumn of 2012, and Part B, which contained 7 episodes, aired in the spring of 2013. Steven Moffatt once again is showrunner for the show, a role he's had since Series 5. Now there's a lot to talk about with Series 7. It's a very interesting series and also quite a controversial one amongst Doctor Who fans, so let's get on with this review. Series 7 is the first modern Doctor Who series to not really have a strong story arc. Now, after all of the criticisms that the Series 6 story arc had about it being too complex and confusing, it's clear that Steven Moffatt went in the other direction to make a series which was very simple. A lot of the episodes in Series 7, I would say, are self-contained stories. You could tune in and watch them without having to watch any of the other episodes. And while this was a novel idea and it does keep things very simple, for longer term viewers, the series does come across as just boring. There's no real stakes. You can miss out an episode and it will make no difference to the eventual conclusion of the series, which is a bit of a letdown. Now, Series 7 is divided into two parts, Part A and Part B, and honestly at times this series really does feel like two distinct series just pushed together. Part A, where we see the Doctor travelling with Amy and Rory, we see the conclusion of their storyline. And Part A is the weakest. Quite a few of the episodes in Part A are really a letdown. They're not even bad, they're just average and boring. And also, Amy and Rory, I just feel they have no place in Series 7. I feel like their storylines should have ended in Series 6, so to continue them in Series 7, it just feels wrong, because throughout this series you can just tell that they no longer really want to travel with the Doctor, so that just makes the viewer feel that they have no place in the series anymore. Part B is when the series picked up. Not only do they radically transform the intro, the Doctor's outfit, the Tardis interior, but they also pick up the pace as well. A number of the episodes in Part B are my personal favourites. I really enjoy them. Clara Oswald, the new companion that's introduced as the Impossible Girl. I really like Clara. She's a likeable character, and Jenna Coleman shares great chemistry with Matt Smith on screen, and it's this relationship which carries the latter half of Series 7. Now, as I've said, Series 7 does have problems. Sometimes it feels way too simplistic. There isn't that much of a story arc, and Part A is a letdown compared to Part B. But what about the individual episodes? Well, throughout this review, I'm going to give a little mini review of each individual episode of Series 7. Then I will round it up with a conclusion where I'll share my final thoughts on Series 7 and why I feel that despite everything, it was below my expectations. The Doctor, the Widow and the Wardrobe, the 2011 Christmas special, is a massive letdown. We're introduced to a character called Madge, who is a mother who's trying to keep the news from her kids that their father was killed during the First World War, and she just doesn't want to tell them because it's coming up to Christmas and she just wants them to enjoy Christmas and not have the time blackened by the news of their father's death. And you expect a Christmas special to be cheesy, but this episode just took it to a whole new level. I don't like the 11th Doctor in this episode. He acts like a kid and it does get annoying. A lot of the jokes do fall flat. Madge is an okay character and I kind of like the principles that she's just trying to look after her kids. Speaking of her kids, they're underdeveloped and the acting isn't very great, so that does take you out of the episode at times. To be honest, most of this episode is dull. It's all about the Doctor taking them to this magical land which is under threat, and they have to try and save this forest, and Madge ends up being able to save it because she wants to be home and all of this. And it's just dull, it's cheesy, it's predictable. It doesn't really offer anything when you consider how Series 6 ended. This episode is just too light-hearted with no real stakes. I don't like this episode. I understand that Christmas specials try to keep things light, but this episode just bordered on the line of just a waste of time and just overly cheesy. And that's exactly what happened. Oh, and the fact that they're able to rescue the father in the end just made no real sense to me, and it just makes this whole episode seem pretty pointless. So yeah, this is one of the worst Christmas specials Doctor Who has ever done. Asylum of the Daleks. Oh my god. Series 7 got off to a really weak start. The concept of this episode, I hate it. The idea of the Daleks having a parliament and a prime minister just makes no sense. I mean, the Daleks strike me, you know, as quite an imperial and authoritarian type of species. You know, it's the Dalek Empire. They have one ruler who just dominates the political scene. So why all of a sudden do they have a parliament? I mean, do they have elections? Like, are there conservative Daleks? Are there socialist Daleks? Like, I really don't understand how this system works. I think it was just kind of, oh look, it's a creative idea. But when you actually read into it, it makes no sense whatsoever. Amy and Rory on the verge of divorce. I don't like this idea. Now, they do explain it with the idea of Amy not being able to give Rory any children. That kind of is a sweet moment, but the idea that they're on the verge of divorce, I just don't like. I don't see there's any need for it. When you consider that they're only in Series 7 for 5 episodes, this just seems pointless to have them on their relationship in that much jeopardy. So I just don't like that. I do like Oswin, portrayed by Jenna Coleman. Great chemistry with the Doctor from the off, and I do like the twist that Oswin is actually a Dalek. It's kind of foreshadowed and they do it quite well, but overall this episode isn't very good, and I also hate how it's concluded with the Daleks forgetting that the Doctor exists, because obviously it's never actually brought up again. It's just kind of a cliche way to end the episode without the Daleks killing them, and I just hate it. So yeah, Asylum of the Daleks, Steven Moffat's first proper Dalek story, which he wrote himself. Massive letdown. Dinosaurs on a Spaceship, written by Chris Chibnall, and it is probably one of the most Chris Chibnall episodes I have ever seen in my entire life. It has everything from underdeveloped supporting characters who you just don't like because the episode gives them no time to really do anything of worth, to having a villain in the name of Solomon. What a waste of actor David Bradley's talents, because Solomon is just some guy who wants to sell dinosaurs on the black market, and it's just stupid. You can't really understand why this villain is such a massive threat, because he's just a black market trader. So what the hell is the point of getting all hyped up about him? The only part of Dinosaurs on a Spaceship which I enjoy is Rory's relationship with his father Brian. I like how this episode kind of shows at first that they come across as very different people, and Rory doesn't always like his father's interference, but actually as the episode goes on they start to appreciate one another and realise they're actually very much alike. And it is good to see them getting on. I have to admit, you can tell they have quite good chemistry, so that relationship, that was sold to me quite well. The Dinosaurs on a Spaceship concept wears off very quickly. I mean, this episode is just an excuse to see dinosaurs, and the wow factor does wear off quite quickly. Plus, in the final act of this episode, a countdown is introduced, which is just so typical of Chris Chibnall. He introduces a countdown in order to rush the plot in the final act to the finale, and it just doesn't work because it just rushes the episode. So yeah, not a fan of this episode. Chris Chibnall, it was very poor. The characters are underdeveloped, and the whole concept of dinosaurs on a spaceship was just not that interesting from the off. A Town Called Mercy is a diamond in the rough in part A of Series 7. I love everything about this episode, and I think it is hugely underrated. First of all, the episode fully embraces the Western theme. The set design in this episode is really strong. Love the design of the gunslinger. He just has an intensity about him which makes him look like a formidable opponent, and I love the concept of this episode. We see a side of the Doctor that we don't see very often, and that's his darker side. Basically, the gunslinger wants this alien Doctor dead, and this alien Doctor has brought a lot of good things to this small western town called Mercy. And the Doctor decides that this alien doctor, who's a war criminal, who experimented on people and turned them into cyborgs, he must accept his fate, and the gunslinger must have his revenge. And it's just a side of the Doctor which we don't usually see. Seeing him this angry and this disgusted by this alien doctor. I also love Amy and Rory in this episode because obviously they're conflicted. Rory is on the side of the Doctor while Amy is on the side of the alien doctor and doesn't feel that revenge for revenge's sake is the right way to go. One of the best scenes in this episode is the standoff between Amy and the Doctor where Amy is just saying, look, I will not let you do this. You've been travelling on your own way too long and you've forgotten how to relate to humanity. And I just think that's a great scene because it just shows that the Doctor is an alien. You know, he's not human and sometimes he will take the moral high ground on certain issues. This episode is also wrapped up in a really good way as well, with the alien doctor eventually deciding to sacrifice himself in order to save the small town. And I just felt that was a great way to end the episode, especially as the gunslinger decides, you know, to protect the small town for the rest of his days. And I also like that as well. I think that was worked in very well. A town called Mercy, I've heard a lot of people say that it's not very good, and I can't see why, because I think it shows a darker side to the Doctor which we haven't seen before. The concept of this episode is really good, and also I like it when the companions stand up to the Doctor, and that's exactly what Amy does during this episode. The Power of Three, really interesting concept, concluded in an awful way. This episode revolves around the Doctor having to stay with Amy and Rory because these small black cubes appear throughout the world and no one really knows what they're doing and whether they're a threat or not. And that's a really interesting mystery, and you do actually feel invested in this plot throughout. This episode also has great commentary on the Doctor's relationship with Amy and Rory. You can tell that Amy and Rory are just ready to move on with their lives. They no longer really want to travel with the Doctor because every time he comes in, he just interrupts their life, so they can never commit to anything. And I like that because it's something which has never been done before. We've never really seen companions just kind of grow out of travelling with the Doctor, so it was interesting to see it go down that route. The main reason this episode falls apart is because of the cube plot and how it's concluded. The cubes eventually just start giving people cardiac arrests, which is not interesting, it's not that creative, and it's, you know, you're just not really infused by it. An unnecessary countdown is introduced. Chris Chibnall was once again writing this episode, so a countdown is introduced to just rush the plot forward. And the Doctor just fixes everything with his sonic screwdriver, which was just a massive anticlimax. I'm not being funny, but that lets this episode down. How the cube threat is kind of concluded. That does let this episode down. Despite that though, I do like what they do with Amy and Rory. They also introduce the character of Kate Stewart, who's the head of unit. She's a really good character as well. So this episode, I'm often conflicted about because it has really good things. It's just the main plot, which is just a massive letdown. The Angels Take Manhattan has a creepy and suspenseful atmosphere, which is perfect for the Weeping Angels. The whole concept of this episode, I love. The idea that the Weeping Angels are using a hotel as a kind of battery farm where they can keep sending people back in time a little bit and then just keep doing it until they just die of old age. I think that's a really interesting concept, and I love how this episode teases Amy and Rory's departure. With Riversong having written a book in the future about these events, it's great to see the Doctor trying to change the future. Like, he knows it's coming, but he's just trying so desperately to alter the future, and it's great. It really is. I love how a paradox in the end defeats the Weeping Angels, with Amy and Rory deciding that if they jump off a building and die, then the events would never happen. And I love that because the Weeping Angels, of course, being killed by a paradox, that just makes sense. It doesn't feel like a cop-out. Now, does this episode have a couple of plot holes? Yes, it can get a bit messy at times. But what this episode has, which I think kind of puts all those plot holes to one side, is a very emotional core. The finale of this episode, when of course Rory is sent back in time by a Weeping Angel and Amy decides that she'd rather be with Rory than the Doctor, and that is a truly heartbreaking scene. Matt Smith and Karen Gillan, they have a beautiful exchange during their final moments, and when Amy is taken, you can just see that the Doctor is absolutely devastated by that. And this really, I think, is a watershed moment for the Doctor. The 11th Doctor was never the same person after the events of The Angels Take Manhattan. I also like the inclusion of River Song in this story. I think as it was an episode revolving around Amy and Rory's departure, it was right to bring River Song back, considering she's their daughter. And I also like the final scene between the Doctor and River Song, where, you know, River Song's kind of like, I'll always be there for you, but I can't travel with you full time because that just wouldn't work. And I just think that's a really nice scene, which kind of showed that the Doctor, once again, is on his own. So I like The Angels Take Manhattan. It's got a few plot holes, but it makes up for it with emotional moments. The Snowmen, the 2012 Christmas special, ushered in a new era for Doctor Who, and I have to admit, Doctor Who has never looked so good. The new intro, I love. The Doctor's new outfit, I think, is way better than his old one. And the TARDIS interior is probably the best TARDIS interior that I have seen in Doctor Who so far. Because it just feels like another dimension. I mean, it just is huge, and I think that works because the TARDIS is supposed to be bigger on the inside, and this TARDIS interior really does make you see that. Now, the Snowmen, the episode itself, I think is really good. It has a good mix of action, emotion, as well as charm, and that's exactly what you expect from a Doctor Who Christmas special. Richard E. Grant as Dr. Simone, I think he is great. Richard E. Grant, I think, was born to play a villain, so he really does work. And I also like his character development, the idea that he's never really had any friends or connections in life, so he's just kind of turned against humanity, and he's turned to the Great Intelligence, who supported him since he was a young boy. The Great Intelligence is voiced by Ian McKellen, which is just perfect casting. He adds a very sinister presence to that role just by using his voice, so very good voice acting. I like Clara. We're introduced to Clara once again. This time she's a Victorian barmaid and nanny. And I love this incarnation of Clara. She's probably my favourite. I love her interactions with the Doctor. And I also like the characters of Madame Vastra, Jenny Flint and Strax. They provide support for the Doctor and also some funny moments. I know I've said in the past I'm not a massive fan of Strax, but he works in a more light-hearted Christmas episode because he is actually very funny. But the main thing about this episode, which I love, is the character development they do with the Doctor. It is strange seeing the 11th Doctor having just given up. He's decided after Amy and Rory, he's not helping anyone anymore. He's not kind. He just wants to live in isolation. And that's really interesting because we've never really seen the Doctor like this before. And I love how throughout this episode we see him kind of conflicted over whether to help or not. But in the end, he decides that he can't just sit back. He has to help save the day. And it's great to see him back in full swing, back to where he belongs, saving the universe and protecting humanity. Now, the Snowmen in this episode, which the Great Intelligence is trying to use to create a permanent physical form, have a cool design. I mean, I would say it's pretty difficult to make snowmen scary, but this episode does a decent job of that. There's a lot of action and funny moments in the Snowmen. And also, the conclusion of this Christmas special, I think, is done really well. The idea that Clara's apparent death creates the emotions necessary for all of the snow to just turn to water, which then defeats the Great Intelligence, I think is quite clever. It doesn't feel like a cop-out. If anything, it makes a lot of sense, considering that the Great Intelligence kind of feeds off emotions and intelligence and stuff like that. So I think that works quite well. I also enjoy the cliffhanger to this episode, when the Doctor realises that Clara was the same woman who he met in Asylum of the Daleks, Oswin. And I think that is a great twist because it really does end on a cliffhanger, and you can't wait to see who this Clara is and why she keeps popping up in the Doctor's life. So the Snowmen, it did usher in a new era for Doctor Who. It was just out of the ballpark compared to Part A of Series 7. It's one of my personal favourite Christmas specials because I think it has plenty of action and also comedic and emotional moments as well, which is what you need from a Christmas special. The Bells of St. John, the first episode in which we're introduced to the modern version of Clara Oswald, and I have to say, I kind of like her. She comes across as quite likeable. She's a babysitter who looks after two kids most of the time. And I also like the chemistry she shares with the Doctor. It's very interesting seeing the Doctor kind of wonder who Clara is and why he keeps encountering her. And that does add some mystery to the character, which is quite interesting. I would say the main thing with an episode when you're introducing a new companion is you have to spend, I would say, 2/3 of the time focusing on the relationship the companion will have with the Doctor and the other third on the plot of the episode. And that's exactly what the Bells of St. John does. Now, the concept of this episode, the idea of having an organisation which is using Wi-Fi to download people's consciousness, their souls, is interesting. I suppose it was quite a novel concept back in 2013 when there was loads of questions over Wi-Fi and whether it was safe or whether it could be used as a weapon. Looking back, is it a little outdated? Kind of, but I've seen more out-of-date Doctor Who episodes than the Bells of St. John. For me, the scene of this episode is when the Doctor and Clara save the plane. I think that was a really interesting way of introducing Clara to what travelling with the Doctor would be like. Plus, it's also got a lot of adrenaline as well, which I really enjoy. But there is one thing I don't enjoy about the Bells of St. John, and that's the Doctor's ridiculous motorbike, the anti-gravity motorbike. For some reason, I've just never really enjoyed that. I just feel like it's a novel concept which really doesn't make any sense. So yeah, I'm not a fan of the Doctor's motorbike. I felt like it was primarily just there so that the BBC could then sell toys of it. So I could be wrong, but that's what it came across to me. So the Bells of St. John, it's an okay episode. It introduces Clara quite well, and the concept of the plot itself is not too bad. The Rings of Akhaten. How can anyone not like this episode? It's just so charming. And a large number of different kinds of aliens are introduced, which is good because it kind of highlights to Clara how diverse travelling with the Doctor is going to be. The songs used in this episode just add so much atmosphere to it and also make it very unique. There isn't really an episode which has as much atmosphere as the Rings of Akhaten. I like the concept of this episode, the idea that the god which these aliens are worshipping is actually a parasite which is feeding off its followers. I felt that was an interesting idea and a good way to go with that idea of this mystical god, and turns out it's something just so vile in what it's doing. The Doctor gives such an emotional speech in this episode that at one point you honestly feel like he's going to regenerate, because it does feel like a regeneration speech, and Matt Smith's acting during that scene is first rate. I mean, you cannot fault this guy as an actor. He can just bring so much to the role of the Doctor. You have the long song playing in the background. I really like the long song. It's a beautiful piece of music and it's performed really well by all of the actors involved. I also like that Clara is the one who saves the day by using a leaf which was able to get her parents together to feed it to the parasite, which then kind of overloads it. I felt that was an interesting idea because it gave Clara, as the new companion, a time to shine and kind of prove her worth to the Doctor. So the Rings of Akhaten, it's a really nice episode. It's emotional, it's got good atmosphere, and also you cannot fault the music in this episode because it is first class. Cold War, my favourite episode of Series 7, hands down. It's such an intense episode. It's a base under siege story set on a nuclear submarine involving an ice warrior, and it's just intense. The closed set really does this episode a lot of credit because you can just feel how claustrophobic and tense it is. The soldiers being at war with one another over what to do is great because obviously in these tense situations not everyone's going to agree with one another. There's going to be a difference of opinion. The Ice Warrior, Skuldark, who's introduced, is really good as a villain. He's set up amazingly. Even when he's in the ice, you can just, by what the Doctor says, understand that this is a formidable opponent, an Ice Warrior at the very top, at the very peak of his military career, and that really does add tension to the episode. Now, while I love the Ice Warrior, I do know some people don't like the fact that the Ice Warrior comes out of his suit in this episode. Now, at first I didn't mind it because you couldn't actually see the Ice Warrior. You only saw his hands and his arms, and it did provide a lot of tension, especially as he was killing off the soldiers one by one. It is a letdown by the end of this episode when he reveals his face. I just don't feel that's necessary. I feel like it was better left to the viewer's imagination. Much like when you saw a Weeping Angel move in Series 5, I just feel like seeing an Ice Warrior's face was just not necessary. It kind of just undermines their presence, if you ask me. Saying that though, a really tense final scene between the Doctor and the Ice Warrior as he's prepared to press the nuclear button to just wipe out humanity because he feels like he has nothing left. That is a really tense scene, and the Doctor really wouldn't have been able to do anything about it. He would have just had to gone through with his promise that if he even attempted to press that button, the Doctor would blow up the nuclear ship before he had a chance. So I just felt that was a really intense scene, and even though I've seen this episode loads of times, I'm still on the edge of my seat throughout, which shows that the writer, the director, and everyone involved have made something special. Hyde is an interesting episode. It embraces the creepy horror atmosphere quite well. There are a couple of jump scares in this episode which keep you on the edge of your seat, so it does a good job in that aspect. I really like the two ghost hunters they introduced. They're good actors and they have quite good chemistry on screen, so you kind of believe this kind of will they won't they relationship. It does work well, and you're kind of happy that they get together by the end of the episode. I also like the idea that the ghost that they're trying to hunt is actually a time traveller from a mirror dimension who keeps kind of flashing into theirs every once in a while. It's a good blend of horror and sci-fi, which kind of works well in the show of Doctor Who. This episode, once again, I like the build-up of it, and the atmosphere is good and the plot's quite interesting, but how it's concluded, I have mixed feelings about. The idea that Clara is able to fly the TARDIS in order to save the Doctor, I don't know why. I'm not a fan of that. I know companions have flown the TARDIS before, like River Song, but I don't know why. But Clara, I mean, this is only the 4th episode where we've had this version of Clara as a companion, and her being able to fly the TARDIS, I'm not a fan of that. I'm not a fan of that. But saying that, the majority of this episode is pretty decent. I like the horror route that they go down. The side characters are pretty likeable. And the actual concept of the ghost just being a time traveller was a pretty good twist. Journey to the Centre of the TARDIS is an episode which just feels like it's trying to be bizarre for the sake of being bizarre. I'm not a fan of this episode. I think it's incredibly weak. The side characters that are introduced are not likeable. They're honestly just helping the Doctor to try and get a reward. And while I like how the Doctor kind of bullies them and forces them to help him, it doesn't change the fact that the Doctor was just making a fake promise. You know, he was just lying, he was bluffing, he never actually intended to hurt them. We do see more of the TARDIS interior, which is pretty interesting. I like that. And the TARDIS kind of being a bit of a villain is an interesting idea, but for the most part this episode is just confusing and dull. The monsters that are introduced, which actually just turn out to be burnt versions of Clara, are just a strange concept and not really that interesting. It's not even like the designs stand out in any way. And how they just conclude this episode by the Doctor rewriting time makes this entire episode fairly pointless. I mean, if this episode never happened, then why the hell did I just watch it? Honestly, out of all the episodes in Series 7, you could just not watch Journey to the Centre of the TARDIS and it wouldn't spoil Series 7 for you. So yeah, this episode is probably the weakest out of Part B. It really is. The Crimson Horror is once again an episode which I think is a little underrated. I like the fact that it's a fairly Doctor-light story. We follow the characters of Madame Vastra, Jenny and Strax in trying to locate the Doctor and solve this mysterious place called Sweetville. And I kind of like the idea that the Doctor's not in this episode a lot, and I like the characters of Madame Vastra and Jenny. It's honestly just Strax which I sometimes have a problem with because I just think he undermines how threatening the Centaurans used to be. Mrs. Guineaflower, who's the villain, who is basically being influenced by this parasite and wants to preserve humanity. Now I understand that it's a bit of a confusing idea, but I've kind of studied late Victorian society as part of my history degree, and it's odd how many similarities there are, in the sense that there were these concerns in the late Victorian era over social degeneration and the idea that society was in decline, and you know there was a need to kind of save the moral principles which were slowly being made extinct. And it's interesting because this episode is a lot about the idea of trying to preserve purity and like the right kind of people that need to be saved from the coming apocalypse. And I just felt that was a really interesting idea. Where this episode goes wrong, like a lot of episodes in Series 7, is how it's concluded. Mrs. Guinea Flower ends up just dying, which is just a clumsy way to end the episode. And then that's it. It's kind of a little pointless. I kind of like the setup they do with this mystery, but as soon as they rescue the Doctor, it's then just the Doctor saving the day quite quickly and quite easily. So yeah, the Crimson Horror, I like the idea, and I kind of like the commentary it does on late Victorian society. It's just a shame it was let down by the conclusion. Nightmare in Silver is a pretty solid Cybermen story, but there are some problems. For one, the Cybermen's new design. I'm not a fan of it. It just comes across as way too robotic, and I think it undermines how the Cybermen are supposed to be converted humans. You know, that's what's supposed to be so creepy about them. So making them more robotic just kind of undermines that concept. Saying that though, I like the Cyber Planner in this episode. The Cyber Planner is introduced and kind of takes over the Doctor, and Matt Smith gets a chance to show how versatile an actor he is, as he has to portray both the Doctor and the Cyber Planner. And I think it's great when they're playing a game of chess to decide who wins, which is a great concept as well. Seeing Smith, you know, rapidly just change from being the Doctor into the Cyber Planner is great. I mean, he does a great job throughout this episode. I also like Clara in this episode, how she kind of takes control of the soldiers and kind of tries to help them defend the Doctor and Cyber Planner from the Cybermen which are coming. Nightmare in Silver is okay. I think it's a good storyline. I think it's decent. I think what makes it stand out to me is Matt Smith's acting, because he's just great as the Doctor and Cyber Planner. So I don't really have a problem with Nightmare in Silver. I think it's an okay story. The Name of the Doctor is a pretty mixed bag in terms of a Doctor Who finale. I like how all the Doctor's friends and companions kind of get together to try and save the Doctor from his death, and I also like how the Doctor is kind of conflicted, because he knows if he wants to save his friends, that could very well lead to his death, and obviously he doesn't want that to happen. He doesn't like endings. He just wants to continue and live in complete and utter denial, which is exactly what the Doctor does. I like that the Great Intelligence returns. Richard E. Grant once again gives a solid performance. He was just born to play a villain, and he does a great job throughout this episode. The Great Intelligence's plan is also quite well done. The idea that he wants to go into the Doctor's timeline in order to defeat him every single time. I think that was an interesting idea, because that really does just destroy everything that the Doctor's worked so hard for. Where this episode starts going wrong is when Clara jumps into the Doctor's timeline, and then we learn that an incarnation of Clara has helped every single incarnation of the Doctor at some point. And I don't know why, but that idea I'm not a massive fan of. I think it gives Clara a god complex, the idea that she's the most important person in the Doctor's life. And I know Clara was only trying to help, and her sacrifice, you know, is done in a pretty convincing way. But I just don't like how significant it makes Clara as a character. I just don't feel that that was necessary to happen. But there are some touching moments in The Name of the Doctor. I like when the Doctor and River Song kind of have one final goodbye. I think that's a really emotional scene, and I think it shows how close the Doctor and River Song really are. So I just think that works well. And I also, the cliffhanger of this episode, because obviously The Name of the Doctor was setting up the 50th anniversary. So we're introduced to this mysterious figure of the Doctor, portrayed by John Hurt. And that was done really well. I remember when I first saw this, and you were just kind of gobsmacked that there was John Hurt as the Doctor, and it was like, well, who the hell is this? Is this a future incarnation, a past incarnation? You know, who the hell is this? So I thought that cliffhanger really does get you, you know, built up for the 50th. The Name of the Doctor is okay. It's only a 45-minute episode, and part of me thinks that to have a more meaningful series finale, it should always be a two-parter. And, you know, I'm not a fan of what they do with Clara in this episode. But apart from that, The Name of the Doctor, it's not a bad finale, and it does set up the 50th anniversary quite well. So in conclusion, Doctor Who Series 7 is a mixed bag. I think the main problem with Series 7 is it doesn't have a consistent story arc, so viewers may find it difficult to tune in to every single episode, because you just may have a lack of determination, as you know that none of these episodes are really going to do anything to build up the finale of the series. Speaking of the episodes, some of these episodes in Series 7 are exceptional. Ones such as A Town Called Mercy and Cold War I'd struggle to find fault with. Others such as The Power of Three and Hyde are okay. And some, such as Asylum of the Daleks and Dinosaurs on a Spaceship, are just some of the worst Doctor Who episodes I have ever seen. One thing which Series 7 has which I can't fault is Matt Smith. He's exceptional as the Doctor. He brings so many varying performances in this episode, and some of his performances, such as that in The Snowmen, as well as in Nightmare in Silver, really show how diverse he is as an actor. Speaking of Series 7, it really does feel like two separate series just thrown together. Part A is a massive letdown, and I'm not a massive fan of it. Part B is where Series 7 starts getting good. The introduction of Clara Oswald is done well, and I like her chemistry with the Doctor. If Clara had been the full-time companion throughout Series 7, I might hold Series 7 in high regard. But given that Series 7 is a mixed bag, some bits of it are really good, while others are really bad. And that's why Series 7 gets a well-deserved firewood ranking. Because sometimes it's nice to look at, but other times you're just left in a cloud of smoke and you don't really know what's going on. So thanks for watching, guys. I really do hope you enjoyed my review of Doctor Who Series 7. Please remember to like, comment and subscribe in order to receive great and maybe even improved quality content in the future. Now, in 2 months' time, I will be reviewing Doctor Who's 50th anniversary episode as well as the 2013 Christmas special, The Time of the Doctor. So I hope you look forward to that, and I will see you in another one. See ya!